Go.
Go. Hallo, vi tar på engelsk, tenker jeg. Det Einar fra Einar from Unity Center. I have to speak English. Today we have Ted Schmidt here, directly from Gardermoen and USA. And he is going to have a workshop this weekend. He's going to talk about Vedanta. There's some kind of Hinduism thing, Vedas, you maybe heard about that. He's going to tell a little bit about himself after the introduction here. I wanted to tell us a little bit about what Vedanta is first. So, Ted, welcome to Norway and the Unity Center.
Well, thank you very much.
You're an expert in consciousness, I think. Yeah. So, if you can tell a little bit first about what I never heard about Vedanta.
Yeah.
I heard about the Vedas, but not Vedanta.
Right.
Can you tell a little bit short about that?
Sure. Yeah. Very few people hear about it, actually.
Yeah.
It's sort of the ultimate culmination that of the spiritual path, you might say. Whether it's traditional Vedanta, which is what I teach, or just the knowledge that we could say constitutes Vedanta, it's that knowledge that sort of wraps things up, constitutes what is commonly known as enlightenment, but actually in the scriptures is what is referred to as moksha, or liberation. And what is it liberation from? Suffering, which that's pretty much what everyone's after.
Yeah.
So what Vedanta is, as you mentioned, it is related to the Vedas. The Vedas are the oldest scriptures known to mankind.
That's before Buddhism.
Before Buddhism, before anything.
Yeah.
Initially, the wisdom contained in the Vedas was passed down orally for millennia. Who knows how long? And then it was finally put into writing, and
How long since?
At least 5,000 years,
wow.
I believe. So it's been, so it is the oldest written scripture as well on Earth. Now, the Vedas, we could get into the fine points, but roughly, generally speaking, there are roughly two sections of the Vedas. There's the first section, which is called the Karma Kanda, which deals with karma means action. So it's like how to make your way in the world. Okay, and most of the Vedas are focused on the Karma Kanda. So it's how to ensure health, how to have progeny, how to find a mate, how to make a success in the world. Okay, and it's all the rituals that were performed since time immemorial that would ensure that you could make a successful life for yourself in accordance with what is called dharma, or just living in accordance with the laws, the ethical laws, the physical laws, the psychological laws that lead to a cohesive functioning of the universe for everyone. So at any rate, that's about 3/4 of the Vedas. And then the last section is the Jnana-kanda, the knowledge section. So that is what we call Vedanta. And it's in fact also referred to as the Upanishads. So if people have heard of the Upanishads, those are the scriptures. Now these are the insights of the ancient rishis. Well, actually all the Vedas are the insights of the ancient rishis. And rishis are seers, maybe visionaries. They didn't just make this up, but in deep states of meditation or, through thorough contemplation, they came to realize these already existent truths. So we say it's revealed wisdom, it's aparusha jnanam, it's not of human origin, it's knowledge, jnanam is knowledge. Aparusha, Purusha is a person, you put an a in front of that word, and it means it's not of. So it's not of human origin, which sounds weird.
Okay.
Because what is this? Some mystical. Well, it's not exactly that. I mean, you could think of even the law of gravity. Isaac Newton didn't just theorize it and make it up. He discovered a truth that was already existent. Now, this truth is even deeper because we could say gravity is sort of a relative truth. It's a truth of this reality. what Vedanta reveals is the ultimate truth that underlies this, what we would then call an apparent reality. It's certainly experienceable, but it's not the ultimate truth of existence. And of course, I can't, explain that whole thing right now. That's what is unfolded during the teachings.
Yeah.
But through Vedantic self-inquiry, or just, we call it self-inquiry, because the very nature of existence, there can only be one fundamental reality, so whatever the nature of existence is our fundamental nature, so it is ourself. But through that analysis of our experience, that's guided by the wisdom in these scriptures, the Upanishads, which constitutes Vedanta, we come to this realization of what the fundamental truth is. Now, Vedanta itself, the word Vedanta, Vedas are the scriptures themselves, but Veda means wisdom.
Okay.
Then Anta is the end. So it's the end of the Vedas, because it's the last portion of the Vedas, but it's also the end of wisdom, or the end of knowledge, because it's the final knowledge. It's the knowledge that reveals the fundamental truth.
Is it the Vedanta is talking about, teaching about today? Is it the same thing as the original 5,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Or is somebody changing it?
No. That's a great question. Yeah. No, it has been preserved through a specific teaching methodology, actually, that's still employed. There's a way to unfold this traditional Vedanta that makes it, that brings forth these revelations. So even though we may not be the rishis themselves who are seeing these visions in deep states of meditation spontaneously, although some people still do, because Vedanta isn't the only way to get enlightened or attain moksha. Okay, any tradition, there are saints and seers and sages in any tradition, enlightened beings in any tradition. But what's great about this traditional Vedanta is that the teaching has been preserved, and if it's unfolded in a certain way, it's tried and true. It's time tested. That if the student is qualified, the teacher knows how to unfold this, it will lead to that realization, and it invariably does. And and what's even greater about it is that if someone's having a hard time getting it, Vedanta also has the means to cultivate the mindset that will will facilitate the assimilation of the knowledge. So it's really it's a full package. It doesn't just say like either you're going to get it or you're not. Which, not to bash any of the modern teachings, but there are a lot of teachers in the modern world that are spouting the truth, or not just spouting it, but I mean they are speaking the truth, but it's kind of just, well, this is it, and you either get it or you don't. What's great about Vedanta is it takes you step by step through a bunch of teaching methodologies, which are called prakriyas. And through that logical progression and that logical unfoldment, you can't help but finally just come face to face with who you truly are. And so that's what's unique about it. That's what makes it so special and makes it so powerful.
And one thing, just want to clarify, everybody heard about Hinduism and Buddhism. You said Vedantas come first, and where does Buddhism come in here? Okay. They also use the Vedantas, don't they? Vedas?
They use but they probably refer to the Vedas. I mean, I'm not an expert in Buddhism. In my spiritual questing, I dabbled in it a bit, but I don't, I'm not like a expert on the history of it, or but this I do know. Siddhartha was a Hindu, and in his day and age there was some corruption among the Vedic priests. Okay, so these Vedic priests were the ones who conducted the rituals. Okay, so in the Vedic culture, which was it predated Hinduism, but Hinduism is based on it. Okay, the Hindu practices, I guess, are based on that. There was this priesthood then that conducted these rituals, and there started, as is wont to happen, among human beings, there came about some corruption. So they started, charging people exorbitant fees and whatnot. So the Buddha saw this corruption going on and wanted to just cleanse the spiritual path of that corruption. So he kind of went to, it was a little bit like Martin Luther in a way, to use a Christian analogy, but he took it to another extreme where he wiped out all the deities.
Because deities,
deities are like the gods,
okay.
Which is that's another misconception. I don't mean to get off on a tangent here, but people think like Hinduism worships all these different gods, and it's really not seen that way. I mean, within the context of Hinduism, all the gods are just different aspects of the one entity that is, God the creator, or Ishwara is referred to. So it's not that they're worshiping a number of different gods, it's just different qualities. So, like in the Christian tradition, or at least the Catholic tradition, you'd have, different saints that are responsible for different aspects. So it's a little like that. Or I'll mention how it ties into Buddhism in a minute. But so initially, Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha. Because Buddha just means enlightened one. It's not his name. Okay, so at any rate, he cleared away all the deities so that it wasn't like the priests could be the channel to the deities or something. So he got rid of all that and just made it kind of a personal, impersonal practice, you might say, direct line. Okay, and then what happens, it's human nature that we need something to relate to. I mean, ultimately, the self is, which is unfolded, is, attributeless. It's limitless conscious existence. While it doesn't have any qualities, limitlessness precludes any type of attributes or qualities. So really, that's the fundamental truth. However, as you're making your way toward that realization, it's pretty tough to just be like, I'll just relate to nothing. I mean, what seems like nothing, it's actually not nothing. It's conscious existence. But nevertheless, there's nothing, no object to relate to. So we need deities. We need something. We can call it by any name, but we need something to relate to, some higher power, that type of thing. So then what Buddhism has done is it replaced all the deities with different Buddhas. There's a Buddha for everything, right?
Okay.
So it's sort of, gone back to that, it's reintegrated or reintroduced the deities into the Buddhist practice. But yeah, so, it's often said that Buddhism is a chip off the tooth of the Vedas. Because they're not the same. It doesn't really unfold the teachings in the same way. But really, when you get down to the essential truth, I mean, there's a lot of misinterpretations of both Vedanta and Buddhism that sort of miss the mark. But when you get down to the, the fundamental non-dual truth that's revealed, they boil down to this.
Yeah, so
there's only one fundamental reality. Right?
So Vedanta is the real thing then?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I want to just ask a little bit about yourself, but first I want to say I want to talk about the mind, the intellect, emotions. How does emotions be made from the intellect or the mind? That's very interesting. But first I want to ask you a little bit about yourself. Who is Ted? When did you start getting interested in spirituality? You're working as an English teacher now, I know.
Well, yeah, I recently resigned, but to focus more on teaching Vedanta. But yes, for 26 years I taught high school English. So, well, the original impetus for my spiritual quest, oddly enough, was I was an athlete, in my younger years, and I was pretty intense about it. I wanted to be. I aspired to be a pro baseball player, actually. That was my sport of choice. And so in my quest for athletic, perfection or whatever, I was always after, like, what is that what is that thing that it will ensure peak performance every time out? So I started to get interested in it in that mundane way, just like what would ensure peak performance. And as I investigated that more, it seemed to be more about the mind than the body, than training the body. I mean, you have to have, certain physical skills, but it was about the mindset that you're working with, and the different ways we sabotage ourselves mentally, and this and that. So I started to dabble in it in that way. And then my mom, was kind of instrumental too. She was, a Christian and everything, but she kind of put this bug in my ear early on that there was more to the Bible than meets the eye. The literal interpretation really didn't stack up, and there was some secret truth. She didn't really get into maybe what it was. I don't know if she knows, but nevertheless, it was, that made me think, there's something more than, something deeper, beneath the surface. So I was always sort of intrigued by that. Well, then later, when I, by the time I realized my athletic aspirations weren't probably going to come to fruition, I wasn't going to be a pro athlete, my interest had shifted to writing, art, acting. And there too, though, there arose this question: how do I produce, some great piece of art, or write something, with some kind of insight, or that has a certain, power to it? How do I ensure that when I'm acting, there's a, I'm there, I'm present, I can bring up the emotions necessary. And so then too, that got into, the more I delved into that, the more it went beyond the body, beyond even just the mind, but it was like this spirit informing things. And so that really set me on the spiritual quest, and then I got into yoga and, some of these Eastern philosophies and everything. I spent years investigating yoga, Buddhism, Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. I was, there was an organization called Siddha Yoga. It was a kind of a bhakti path, devotional worship was its main thrust. It included wisdom and knowledge as well, but I got into that for, that was sort of the bedrock for about 25 years of my meditation practice and everything, but I also supplemented it with in this investigation into all these other areas as well. And the last one I really got into seriously was shamanism, African shamanism. I was inducted into an African tribe, and I was a diviner and things like that. And then, even that didn't answer all the most fundamental questions, because again, that was more like the Vedas as opposed to Vedanta. It was about rituals to ensure a good life here, but it didn't really answer, again, what is the fundamental truth. So
then you met this guy.
Then I happened, through a curious series of events, I happened upon James Schwartz, who was about the only Western, traditional Vedanta teacher that was really teaching at the time. And that was kind of the final piece of the puzzle.
What was his name again?
James Schwartz.
James Schwartz.
Yeah. And he was instrumental. He was my final teacher, and it was really through his teaching that I got free. Where I found out who I am.
Yeah.
So that was the end of 30 years or so of
lots of spiritual research.
Yeah.
But you don't look like you're so old. How old are you?
51.
51.
Yeah.
You've done a lot on these years. Then.
Yeah.
What I want to very interested in asking about in the Unity Center, we work a lot about work with traumas, and I think maybe you can explain how a trauma gets made. I want to talk about the mind, the intellect, and how they work together, and how emotions comes out of this.
Okay. All right. So this will take a little while to unfold, so just kind of bear with me here. Let's start by just saying that we have a physical body, and then we have a subtle body. Probably most of the audience is familiar with that.
Subtle, can I take another word?
So it's not, you could think of it as the soul or the spirit.
Yeah.
Okay? All right, so that's another aspect of our being. Now, there's what we call prana, which is the life force. It governs the operation of the body. Okay, so that's part of the subtle body as well, like the respiratory system or the circulation. There's some kind of thing that's moving that. It's not purely physical. I mean, it's a physical process, but it's supported by something non-physical. So that's an aspect of the subtle body, but mainly the subtle body is the mind, or what we would think of in the West, we would refer to it as the mind in general. Okay. Now in Vedanta refers to it and it uses the Sanskrit term antakarana. Okay. So I don't want to confuse people or whatever, but what that simply means is the inner instrument. Okay, which, I mean, that seems...
You're talking about the mind now.
Yeah, so that's the mind. Okay, the subtle, that's the main aspect of the subtle body. Okay, so it's the inner instrument. And for the purposes, I mean, it isn't really like there are 4 different parts or something, but for the purposes of analysis, we break it into 4 different general functions. Okay, so the first function would be mind. And now we in the West use this general term mind to refer to this antakarana. But in Sanskrit, the English translation of this idea is mind, but in Sanskrit it's termed manas. Okay, so it's the non-discriminative mind. So you're not like making decisions. That comes later. Okay, so it's just it performs the functions of perceiving, taking in sensory data, integrating that sensory data into a coherent experience. It's not like we hear a sound and see a sight and then, we somehow have to put it together. It's just boom, it just happens. I see your mouth move, I hear you speak, and it's all one coherent experience. So I know you've asked me a question and I answer. Okay, so the mind does that. So it perceives, it integrates, it doubts. And by doubt, we mean it encounters this experience or this sensory data and then goes, what is this? Because it's not the decision maker. It just perceives it. And then it says, what do I do with this? How do I respond? So that's what we mean by doubting. It's not like, is this real or not? But it's just wondering, okay, now how do I respond? Yeah. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a minute. And then it emotes. I know that sounds weird from the Western perspective, but manas is responsible for emotion. We tend to think of it coming from the heart, but in Sanskrit and in Vedanta, the heart and the mind are not separate. It's not like there's a head and a heart and all that business. It's just the essence of your being. It's all part of the same thing. Okay, so it emotes, and we'll get back to
what's emotes?
It feels. It feels emotions. Okay. It has emotions.
So the mind feels emotions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, you could think of it even logically from a Western standpoint that, I mean, you don't just. I know it seems like we just have emotions spontaneously, but they're connected to a thought. We have to perceive something at least before we respond to it emotionally. So anyway, those are the functions of manas, or the mind. Okay. Then there's the intellect. Okay. So now the intellect is a little bit, as a little another facet of the mind in general, the antakarana, and it has authority, you might say, because it's the decision maker. So it takes that sensory data that has been perceived. And in fact, it perceives as well. Again, these aren't really separate. Okay. But so then the intellect takes the sensory data that the manas has gathered, the mind has gathered, and then it, deliberates over that. And it considers, like, okay, is this a friend or a foe, so to speak? Or is it neutral? Or, and then it too sort of wonders, like, well, how have we responded to this before, or something similar to it, or whatever, and then for that it consults even a higher authority, which we might call our subconscious, or the causal body, but that's we won't go there right now. But so the intellect then considers all this, and then it deliberates over it. It discriminates if it's positive or negative, or something we should fear, or something we should embrace, or whatever. And then it makes a decision. Okay, this is what we're going to do. And then it directs the mind, do this. Or it sends that message back to the mind. Okay, do this. And then the mind has got to convey that to the active organs. So through the perceptive organs, we've brought in the sensory data, but then we've got these active organs. We speak, we grasp things, we move with our feet, locomotion, we excrete waste, we procreate. These are the active organs. Okay? So then they have to be given direction. So the mind then conveys, okay, we've been told, hug this person. Okay? So now we're going to hug the person. And really what emotion is, it's kind of curious. If you think about how we feel, we call it feeling. And it's interesting that term constitutes both feeling emotions and also feeling sensory things, right? Or feeling like, touching, tactile, the tactile sense. So, like, what's interesting is that our emotions are actually connected to the physical response that we're having, or that we're instigating. So what we feel emotionally is basically the activation of the active organs. How are we going to respond to this?
Okay.
So if we're going to hug someone, we feel that attraction toward the person, or that movement toward the person, as affection, as a warm feeling maybe, or whatever. Whereas if we're going to run away or defend ourselves from or try to avoid, then that's more cautionary, or we call that fear. Okay, but that feeling is connected to the action we're gonna take. I mean, it may not always be an action that we're like consciously thinking of, because this happens, just in faster than a split second. It's just so it's not like we're always thinking and deliberating. I mean, sometimes it does work that way, but this happens so instantaneously that it doesn't really seem like we're going through this process, but that's basically what's happening. Now there are two other facets, so that's the mind and then the intellect. Now there are two other facets. There's this, and they're actually parts of the mind and the intellect, but there's the ego. You hear a lot about the ego in the spiritual world, and the ego is simply a thought in the intellect. What's unique about it is it's the only thought that thinks it's a real entity. I mean, thought doesn't actually think, but that's the thought. It is the thought that I am this independently existent person making my own decisions, autonomous from any other being or higher power, and so it claims responsibility for being a person. Okay, that's what gives us the sense that we are this body, mind, sense complex, that the spiritual energy, you might say, is working through, or just it's not even energy, but that the spirit is informing. That's how we get identified with that. It was due to the ego. And then there's another aspect called chitta, which is the memory. And that's where like all our experience is stored, obviously, consciously. And you could also say it has a subconscious aspect where even things that we don't necessarily consciously recall, when we encounter something similar, some data that the mind has brought in, and then the intellect's kind of like, what should I do about it? It calls upon the chitta, like, have we experienced anything similar to this or even this before? But, you know, again, it's not like we're consciously thinking of that, but that informs that from our subconscious. And then we can, or sometimes it's conscious as well, but that's what informs our decisions. Okay? So those are the four aspects of the antakarna, the mind. Now, what happens, and this is what relates to trauma, and by trauma, or the term that we'll use is suffering. I mean, in Vedanta we refer to, we suffer as human beings, and we don't want to suffer. That's really the whole point of Vedanta. I mean, it does get into like, what's the nature of existence, and how does the world come to be, and all of that. It has a cosmology. But the point of Vedanta is not to scientifically explain the origin of the universe, but to eradicate suffering. Because no matter how we got here, we can't deny we are here. And, you know, most of the time, or a lot of the time, we're in some kind of angst. You know, we're uncertain about things. I mean, it can be kind of subtle, or it can be that we're facing real trauma, you know, or what we would call, identify specifically as trauma, and it's really, you know, causing havoc in our lives, and we want to get rid of that, right? So that's what Vedanta is the answer to. It's the solution. It alleviates suffering. So, how does suffering arise? Well, what happens is we have experience. Okay, so we're here. We're identified with being this human being. So here we find ourselves in this grand drama of life. And we are going to have experiences. So we could take something as simple as a chocolate ice cream cone. I think this is the one I use in my book. But okay, so we encounter a chocolate ice cream cone. Now, a chocolate ice cream cone is value neutral. Probably the majority of people on Earth would agree, or those that have encountered a chocolate ice cream cone, that it seems to be really a positive thing. But it's value neutral. It doesn't, you know, there's no rule book in life or whatever, you know, catalog that states this is worth this much, or this is worth this much, or this is good or bad. Okay, so it's value neutral. So we encounter it, and if we have a positive experience with it, that registers in our subconscious. Okay, now we may not, you know, it enters the memory, you might say, and it's not, it's not like necessarily every detail of the experiences is remembered, but a general impression is left, and we know, oh, chocolate ice cream's good. Okay? So we call that a vasana. That's the Sanskrit term. Okay? So that impression is a vasana. So we've got a vasana now. Now, next time we encounter a chocolate ice cream cone, you know, the vasana at this point is not strong enough to motivate us necessarily to go seek a chocolate ice cream cone, but let's say we encounter one again. Friend takes us to an ice cream shop or offers it as a dessert at a dinner party or something. Oh, I'll have some of that. I like that. Okay, that impression triggers that. So then we eat the chocolate ice cream, have yet another pleasurable experience with it, and now the vasana is 2 times stronger than it was. So now, again, it may not be strong enough to make us seek that out,